My name is Robbie Bolton, and I am the university librarian and co-director of the EP Hart Honors Program. Co-director Matt Hill, the Batman to my honors Robin, is there in the back. Yeah, round of applause for Dr. Hill. And we're excited to have Dr. Ryan Burge here with us for our EP Hart Honors lecture today. And this event today is part of the Beckett lecture series. I think it says that here on this nice little program. I'd like to thank the Advancement Office for working with us, the Alumni Office for working with us on making this event possible. Our honors seminar students this spring got to spend an hour with Dr. Burge grilling him. He's still here. So for this 4 p.m. lecture, this is going to be a tight 4 to 5 o'clock. We'll end at 5 o'clock. Told him you can speak all 60 minutes if you want, or if he wants to stop after 5 and just take Q&A, that's fine too. So we'll just see which way the spirit moves. So Dr. Burge, if you're not familiar, the book our honor students read, The Nuns, where they came from, who they are, and where they're going, is the topic of his talk here this afternoon. Has a new book that just came out last month, 20, correct me if I'm wrong, 20 myths of religion in America. So yeah.
I've got a slide for that somewhere. I got to do this.
So
right here, right there.
There it is. So yeah, if you've not bought the first one, buy this one and the Nuns. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Burge. Let's give him a nice Spring Arbor University welcome. Thank you.
Cool. This is the book, The Nuns, where they came from, who they are, and where they're going. As with all good academic research, it started with a tweet. That joke didn't go. Most professors don't tweet. That's the joke. It started with this tweet right here. And actually, I opened the book by talking about how this tweet came about. The General Social Survey had just released its 2018 data. This is in March of 2019. And I was at school teaching all day. And I was driving home. I live 100 miles from campus. And the whole time I was driving home, I was like, I'm going to make a graph. This is the graph I'm going to make. It's going to be great. So I'm driving home thinking about making this graph. And I get home and it's bedtime for my boys. And they're like 5 and 3. And they've got to get a bath and they got to go to bed. And my wife's like, they got to go to sleep. And I'm like, I got to make a graph. And she's like, no, the boys have to sleep. So I made a graph while the boys were in the bathtub. Don't tell anybody. And this is the graph. So I tweeted out. And I had like 600 followers on Twitter, which means if I got like 2 likes, I was like, I'm killing it. I'm doing a great job. And I looked down after getting my kids done with bath, get their jammies on, read them a book. I looked down, 35 retweets immediately. And I was like, oh, this is different. This is not the world I'm used to. And I looked down again, and the tweet just keeps going and going and going and going. And all of a sudden, it's like people wanted to talk to me from the media. I never talked to any media folk ever in my life. And all of a sudden, every news media outlet wanted to talk to me. I talked to CNN. I talked to the New York Post. I talked to the Washington Post. I talked to the New York Times. That graph right there was in both the Times, and this graph is here in the Times and the Post. And I was like, whoa, like that's unbelievable for a guy who comes from the middle of nowhere and who has really no Twitter following and not a ton of publications. And all of a sudden, people want to talk about the Nuns. It made the front page of Reddit. Over 70,000 upvotes. You guys know what Reddit is, and that's a lot. That's a lot of people. I had people texting me from high school I hadn't seen in 20 years going, I saw you on the front page of Reddit. I saw you in the Washington Post. It was weird. And then a year later, my publisher comes knocking on my door and says, you want to write a book? And I said, yeah, sure. They go, what do you want to write about? I go, I want to write about the Nuns. Because I already knew that this is what the public wanted. They wanted to hear more about this. This is obviously something they knew was changing about America, and they did not understand it, and they wanted to understand it more. And I knew I had the skills and the tools to do that. So this graph here is this graph here. This looks a little bit better, cleaned up a bit, changed the colors. Let's knock through a couple of these groups really quick. So we'll start with the Nuns, obviously. In 1972, 1 in 20 Americans said they had no religious affiliation. It was basically a rounding error at that point. In 1968, this famous sociologist named Vernon Woodley writes this paper, says the Nuns are the neglected category in American religion. And they were, because you can't really study a group that's like 5% of the population. There's just not enough of them in America to study. Between 1972 and 1990, the share of Americans who were nuns rose from 5% to 7%. statistically insignificant rise. No one really thought anything about it. Okay, 5% to 7%, no big deal. And then everything changed, right? Between I talked about this in an earlier class, between 1991 and 1998, the share of Americans between the ages of 18 and 35 who said they were nuns rose 12 points in 7 years. And the overall share of Americans who were nuns rose to 12 points by 1988, got to 16 points by 2008, rose to 24% by 2018, and now by most estimates, it's probably about 30% of Americans say they have no religious affiliation. 5% in 1972, 30% by 2020. Probably the largest tectonic shift in American society we've seen in our lives. And we don't even begin to understand what that means. So that's the nuns. Evangelicals, by the way, there are more and I talked about this in 20 Myths. There are more evangelicals today, both by percentage and raw number, than there were in 1972. The share of Americans who said they were born again or evangelical in 2008 was 33%. The share of Americans who said they're born again or evangelical in 2020 was 34%. Evangelicalism is doing just fine, thank you. That's a big myth that evangelicalism is declining. It's actually not declining. It's doing very well. Catholics are doing great if you look at this graph. All my Catholic friends are like, yeah, we're just as good as we were 20, 30 years ago. Here's why you should worry. In 1972, 55% of Catholics went to Mass every week. In 2018, 25% of Catholics went to Mass every week. So they're still claiming the affiliation. They're just not going to church. They're cultural Catholics, right? Ethno-Catholics, not really going to Mass. And this is a story that we don't talk about enough, but we should talk about more. These are mainline Protestants. And you say, Ryan, what's a mainline Protestant? A mainline Protestant is a United Methodist or an Episcopal or a Presbyterian Church USA or ELCA or ABC USA or Disciples of Christ or United Church of Christ, right? They are the more moderate flavor of American Christianity. In 1975, 30% of all adult Americans in this country were mainline Protestant Christians, okay? And they dominated American politics, American religion, and American society. And now they've gone from 30% to 10%. The average mainline Protestant in America today is about 60 years old. In the next 10 years, or probably 5% of America, we will see the wholesale, decline of mainline Protestants across this country in ways we never imagined before. Less than 500,000 people in America are weekly church-going Episcopals. Less than 500,000 in a country of 330 million. Less than 500,000. They did 15,000 baptisms last year in the Episcopal Church. 15,000. That's how small these denominations are getting. Mainline Protestant Christianity is in decline. I say that as a mainline Protestant pastor, okay? This flavor of Christianity is going away. So, question is, why did the nuns go from 5% in 1972 to 30% in 2020 or 2021? As in all things in social science, the answer is that it is complicated, okay? Like, like on like all those Facebook articles that are easily shared, like the one thing that will teach you everything you need to know about the world. This ain't it, guys. It's not one thing. It's many, many things happening all at once. I'm going to try to knock through a couple of them really quickly today. The first is secularization, okay? Secularization is this very old concept in the social science. If you take a sociology of religion class, you're going to hear about secularization theory. It's like one of the baseline sociological theories that exists in the Western world. It's basically the idea that as societies become more educationally advanced and more economically prosperous, they become less religious. Okay? There's several people who advanced this theory. Max Weber, who's probably the most important sociologist to ever live, was really a huge advocate for secularization theory. Weber used this German word, which I'm not going to say. It's translated as disenchantment into the English, but I like this translation better. Demagication. So what Weber says is, imagine you are in the tundra of the, let's say the Fertile Crescent, right? And you're trying to grow crops, and all of a sudden it doesn't rain for a year or 2 years, and all your crops die, and all your children starve to death. And you're thinking to yourself, why in the world did it not rain for a year or two? Or your young son coughs twice and falls over and dies at 4 years old. And you're thinking, why in the world did my 4-year-old son that I love, die? And the shaman or the wise man comes along and goes, it's because God's mad at you. That's the answer, right? It doesn't rain because God's mad at you. Your son dies because God's mad at you. Your wife dies in childbirth because God is mad at you. Or you have a bountiful crop because God's happy with you. What Weber says is the more we learn about science, the less we need God, because we know why your wife dies. We know why your child died because he got a virus. We know why it's not raining because we're in a dry season. We know why these things happen. It's not magic anymore. It's just science, right? So the more magic we have, the less science we have. But the more science we have, the less magic we need. You don't need God because science explains everything. And so what Weber says is, as we learn more about the world, we needed God to explain things less. And so therefore, he took a smaller and smaller role in understanding and explaining things. And then there's our good friend Karl Marx, right? Karl Marx said, hey, you know what religion really is? It's a weapon in the class struggle, right? Marx said, you know what the rich people are trying to do with you with religion? They're trying to tell you that it's okay to be poor and you should be happy in your poverty, which sounds great until you realize they're just doing that to placate you so you won't overthrow them and take over the factory and the plant and make it your own, right? That famous quote from the Communist Manifesto, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. What Marx said is, we don't want to educate the lower class, because as soon as we educate them, they're going to realize how much they're being exploited. And if we tell them how much they're going to exploit it, they're going to kill all the people in power and take power back for themselves. So religion basically is a tool that rich people, powerful people use against you to keep you poor and happy about it. In the American South, they didn't want the slaves to read, because if they read, they would learn how bad off they were and maybe overthrow their slave masters. So religion is a way to keep those people, in their poverty and happy about it. So the object lesson here is Western Europe. I don't know if you've been to Western Europe before, but the data says that Western Europe is basically a secularized part of the world. Okay, a few outliers here. Poland's a really interesting outlier because it's a communist bloc country, so it should be an atheist country, but it's not. 50% of Poles go to church every week, Catholic, predominantly Catholic. Ireland's next, 37%. Portugal, 26%. Italy, 25. But look here at Austria, 11, Switzerland, 9, Belgium, 8, France, 6, Sweden, 6, Finland, 5, Estonia, 3. You go to Europe anymore and you go to a church, it's a museum, not a place of worship. Right? Because religion has been basically taken away from Western Europe. They're not religious there anymore. It's completely secular country in most places. It's really, I have friends who are German who live on the street from us in our neighborhood. They go, if you go to church in Germany, we consider you weird. Like, it's a very odd thing in Germany to go to church. It's not the norm at all to go to church in Germany. But look, this is a scatter plot of GDP per capita down here on the X. So that's a kind of a decent proxy of how educationally or economically advanced you are. And then here's the percentage of people saying religion is very important. See what kind of relationship we have here? Negative relationship, right? The more economically advanced we become, religion becomes less important in our lives. Now, there's obviously a tail over here. Ireland messes everything up because of their taxation system. But there's some outliers down here. You guys see all these outliers down here? Notice anything about them? Russia, Hungary, Latvia, Estonia, Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Belarus, right? Old Soviet bloc countries. There's really only one major outlier on the top, though. Us. If we follow the trend line based on our GDP, the share of Americans who said religion is very important should be about 12%. Instead, it's about 52%. We are much more religious than we should be based on our GDP. We should be almost as secular as most of Western Europe now. So really, we're an outlier. Really, the question is, why are we not more secular if you compare us to Western Europe? We should be way more secular than we are right now. Okay, another theory, social desirability bias. Okay, social desirability bias is the idea that when you take a survey, you lie on that survey. Okay, so you're saying, I would never lie. I always tell the truth. I tell people what I think. Imagine you're walking in a mall. You guys know what a mall is? They used to have stores there. You guys know what I'm talking about? Stores? Hot Topic? Huh? PacSun? You walk there and someone grabs you and goes, hey, would you like to take a survey? We'll give you a $10 gift card to the PacSun. And you say, okay, let's go. They take you in a room in the back and they start asking you questions about your age, your gender, your race. Then they ask you other questions like, do you masturbate? Or are Black people lazy? Have you ever cheated on your partner? Do you do drugs? How many drugs do you do? What kind of drugs do you do? How often do you do those drugs? Should a woman be president? You know what's going to happen? You're going to lie. And we know that you're going to lie because you want to give the socially desirable answer, not the real answer. Because you want to look good in the eyes of the person asking you the question. It's hard to look in the eyes of someone else and go, I did cocaine 5 minutes before I walked in the room. Right? You're not going to say that. You're like, oh, I'm clean and sober my entire life. Live a life of a paragon of virtue. Right? And we know that people lie, especially on questions about religion. Because even in America, even a secularized American climate, we still see religion as a thing we should aspire to. Right? Even if we don't go, we still think we should go because that's the ethos of America. So we know that people lie about religion. And here's how we know that. Ashtabula County, Ohio. It's a rural county in Ohio. Kirk Hathaway and a team went there in the early 1990s and said, you know what, let's just figure out how much people lie about church attendance. So what they did was they sent a survey out to people in Ashtabula County with a bunch of questions on it. And one of the questions was, how often do you go to church? The response rate was 36% of people on the survey said they attended church every week. Okay, 36%. They said, okay, let's just check. Let's see if you're lying or not. So they got the phone book. Again, do you guys know what that is? It's a big book with numbers in it. And they called every church in Ashtabula County and asked the pastor, how many people were in worship last Sunday? Typical Sunday, how many people do you have? Some pastors didn't respond. They drove the parking lots of those churches the next Sunday and counted cars. And then did a formula trying to figure out how many cars equal how many people. And they calculated how many people actually went to church every week in Ashtabula County. It was 20%. So about half the people in America who say they go to church every week actually lie about how often they go to church, right? This is a really pernicious problem for social science because we can't go back to you and go, hey, you remember we took that GSS survey in 1992 and you said you went to church every week. Were you lying about that or not? And, oh, are you lying to me about lying about it then now? You guys get the point? We can't unring the bell. We can't fix that problem, okay? Because we always know we're being lied to. It's how much are we being lied to now versus how much we were being lied to then. Again, it's hard to fix this whole thing. Now, we can't not talk about politics, okay? But here's the thing: the average person, thinks that the intersection of religion and politics is basically it's about abortion and gay marriage. Everything else is kind of secondary to that. And there's theories about the culture war, right? That abortion and gay marriage drove a lot of people away from religion because religion was, anti-LGBT and anti-abortion. And so people left who were pro both those things. But there are other theories out there too that are just as explanatory that most people don't know about. For instance, this argument by Randall Balmer is the religious right actually got started in America not because of culture war issues, but because of race. Randall Balmer tells a story of Holmes County, Mississippi. After Brown versus Board, 1954, all school districts in America had to desegregate. So Black kids and white kids had to go to school together. Well, a lot of districts in the South rejected that and pushed back against that as long as they possibly could. Some places in the South didn't integrate until the late 1960s or early 1970s, okay? Holmes County, Mississippi was one of those places. As soon as they had to integrate, they started a Christian school in Holmes County, Mississippi, and 2 years later, not a single white kid in Holmes County, Mississippi went to public school. They all went to the private Christian school. The IRS steps in and says, we're going to revoke your tax exempt status because we know what you're all doing here. You're trying to segregate the schools again by other means. And then the religious right got behind the school saying, no, they should keep their tax exempt status because of religious freedom, right? By taking their tax exempt status away, they're taking away their religious freedom. He also talks about Bob Jones University. Anybody ever heard of Bob Jones before? Interracial dating was not allowed in Bob Jones University in your life. 2003, they lifted the ban on interracial dating. And Bob Jones University got their tax exempt status revoked by the IRS, and they also fought it on religious freedom grounds, right? So what Randall Balmer says, it's really about racism. It's not about culture war stuff. It's really, that's the core of the whole argument. Kevin Cruz, this is a great book, One Nation Under God, How Corporate America Created Christian America. He makes this really interesting argument that really what it's about capitalism. A lot of rich, well-to-do people in the 1940s and 1950s would, this is amazing to think about, they had sermon contests where you had to write a sermon that extolled the virtues of capitalism. If you had the best sermon, they would give you $1,000. You know what pastors did all over America? Wrote so many sermons about how great capitalism was, which served the needs of the rich people, right? So what Kevin Cruz, and actually Billy Graham You know why Billy Graham was Billy Graham? Because William Randolph Hearst liked Billy Graham and he told his reporters to puff Graham in his papers, which were all over America. So basically backed Graham, and in return, Graham never spoke an evil word about capitalism his entire life, right? So what Cruz says, it's really about capitalism. It's not really about culture war or race. And then there's Christian nationalism, which is this new idea that America, well, it's a newly kind of conceptualized idea that there's a lot of people in America who think that America should be a Christian country, should advocate for Christian values, and that anyone else from any different religion doesn't belong here because America is a Christian nation, right? We should have things like prayer in public school, and we should have official languages of English and things like that. So here's how we know this works out in the data. It's very clear. Only about 12% of people who say they're conservative have no religious affiliation, but amongst people who say they're liberal, it's over 40% say they have no religious affiliation. I mean, it's perfectly stepped up. I promise I didn't cook the data. It looks exactly like this in the data. The further you go left, the further you go away from religion, okay? Over 50% of white liberals today have no religious affiliation. Over 50%. So what we're seeing is to be a liberal in modern America, a political liberal means to have no religious affiliation. And to be a conservative is to be religious. 75% of the current Republican coalition are white Christians. It's 38% of the current Democratic coalition. Think about that. I mean, we could not be more divided when it comes to politics and religion in this country, and it's only going to get worse from here. Other theories really quick: the internet, the collapse of American community, the lack of trust in institutions, the breakdown of the American family, including the child-free movement and rampant divorce in this country. I go into more depth in those in the book. But let's talk about demographics really quick. This is the graph that everyone wants to talk about. The silent generation, people born between 1925 and 1945, so the generation older than the boomers. 49% of them are Protestants and 22% of them are Catholics, which means 71% of them are Christian, Protestant or Catholic, 71%, silent generation. Amongst Generation Z, which is people born 1996 or later, college students, amongst Generation Z, 22% of them are Protestants and 15% of them are Catholics. 71% Protestant or Catholic, 37% Protestant or Catholic. Nuns, 18% of silent generation are nuns. It's 45% of Generation Z. Generation Z is the first generation in American history where the nuns clearly outnumber the Christians. And every day in America, people from the silent generation are dying, and every day in America, another member of Gen Z moves into adulthood. 71, 37. 71, 37. That's why we're becoming less religious, because the people are dying off that are a lot more religious, and they're being replaced by people who are much less religious. And it's only going to get worse from here. So this is what the religious composition of America looks like today. About a third of Americans are Protestant. About 23% of Americans are nothing in particular. About 18% of Americans are Catholic, and no one else breaks 10%. Okay? One thing I always like to point out in this graph is look at how small these religious groups are down here that we hear a lot of people talk about. I mean, there's a Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, Utah, guys. You ever sit back and think about that? You know what? Tulsa, Oklahoma is twice the size of Salt Lake City, but there's no Real Housewives of Tulsa, Oklahoma. We're fascinated by small religious traditions in America. These are really small religious traditions in America, okay? Buddhists, Mormons, Hindus, Muslims, they're 1% of America. People always ask me, do you see this group growing or that group growing? When they're so small, it's impossible to see that statistically if they're growing or not. They're really, really small, okay? For every one Jew there are in America, there are 23 nothing in particulars. There are 34 Protestants. I mean, we got to keep things in proper perspective. But here's the religious composition of college students. Number one choice of college students today, when they see all those options on a survey, is they shrug their shoulders, shake their head, and go, nope, don't want that. Nothing in particular. That's the most prevalent religion amongst young people today. 1 in 3 young people say their religion is nothing in particular, which means they're non-religious. They're not secular. They're not atheists or agnostics. They look at the options and go, nope, don't want that. Look at this. Quick comparison. Young people, 7% are atheists, 6% are agnostic. The entire population, 6% are atheists, 5% are agnostic. Young people are not like teeming with atheists. That's just a myth. Okay, they're not atheist agnostics. It's 11% here, it's 13% there. Right? It's not, that's not the nuns we're talking about growing. Young people are just as likely to be atheist agnostic as older people are. So nothing in particulars that switch, right? 23%, 32%. That's where the change is happening. And nothing in particular group. This is really where the rubber meets the road. This is the share of people who were nuns when that cohort was 18 to 25. So when these people entered adulthood, what percentage of them were nuns when they entered adulthood? It used to be 10 or 12% of people came into adulthood with no religious affiliation. And now it's 33% of people come into adulthood with no religious affiliation. So 1 in 3 young people are raised with no religion. 1 in 3. And by the way, they don't pick it up into adulthood. We know the data says that 2/3 of nuns, people raised nuns, stay nuns as adults. So they come in with no religion, they leave with no religion. That's where the change is happening. Okay, race, interesting stuff here. Asians are 40% of Asians today are nuns. 33% of white people are nuns. 32% of African Americans, and Hispanics actually are outliers on the bottom side. Only about 30% of Hispanics are nuns. Okay, you can see the rise between 2008 and 2018 here. Interestingly enough, the rise amongst Black people is the largest of any group, almost doubled. The share of nuns amongst Black respondents almost doubled between 2008 and 2018. But when they leave religion, only a very small sliver of them become atheist or agnostic. Over 88% of them become nothing in particular. They don't become atheist or agnostic. Okay, so not all nuns are created equal. There's atheists, there's agnostics, there's nothing in particular. There are 3 different categories that represent 3 different kinds of nuns in America. They're not the same. Okay, so this kind of shows you how those groups have looked over time. Again, look, nothing in particular. If you put 5 nuns in a room, one's an atheist, one's an agnostic, 3 are nothing in particular. Most nuns are not atheists or agnostics. They're nothing in particular. That's the group we need to be thinking about more and more. They grew from 14% of America to 21% of America in 12 years. Fastest growing religious group in America today is nothing in particular. It's the meh option. I don't care option. Okay, look at age. This is the average right here. The average adult in America today is 48.4 years old. So everything to the left of this line are traditions where the mean is above average. Notice anything? Mainline, white Catholic, white evangelical, right? The 3 oldest traditions are white Christian traditions, right? Look at atheists. Average atheist is 44.4. The average agnostic is 43.5. The average nothing in particular is 42.5. One of the youngest religious traditions in America. They are nothing in particular. And also I want to point out, you can tell what the future of a tradition looks like by where the bulge is in this data. Look at this. Look at white Catholics and look at white evangelicals. Look where the big part of the distribution is around 55 years old. Which means in 20 or 30 years, these are all going to be dead. Everyone here and up, gone. And look down here, they're going to be replaced by people down here. I'm not so optimistic about that, right? So 60% of atheists are males. They hate when I point this out, but man, atheists is such a white male dominated tradition. It's ridiculous. 48% of all atheists in America are white dudes. Go on Amazon.com, look at the atheist bestseller list right now in the book section. It's all white guys. Hitchens, Dawkins, Sam Harris. It's a white male dominated tradition. For a group that like prides themselves on how liberal and open they are, why are they all white guys? Doesn't make any sense to me, right? So this is where the rubber meets the road for me, though. This is the share of each tradition that has a bachelor's degree or more. This kind of really shows you how the nuns are not the same, okay? 46% of atheists have a 4-year college degree. 43% of agnostics have a 4-year college degree. 21% of nothing in particular have a 4-year college degree. They're the least educated religious group in America today, right? These guys are doing fine. These guys, not doing so fine. Educationally, in a world where you need a degree to get ahead in a globalized economy, they're not getting those degrees and they're not moving ahead. When it comes to income, you can see it pop up here. Almost 60% of nothing in particulars make less than $50,000 a year or more, which means the majority of nothing in particulars live in poverty. Very low education, very low income. Only 12% of nothing in particulars make more than $100,000 a year. It's half the rate of atheists. 25% of them make more than $100,000. Very low income, very low education. Politically, They're actually very moderate, though. Nothing in particular are. They're right in the middle of the distribution. This is partisanship here. This is ideology here. They're actually almost smack in the middle of all that stuff. Atheists are liberal. Agnostics are not far behind. Nothing in particular are not those things. They're actually fairly moderate, sort of left or center politically, but definitely not liberal when it comes to politics. But look at this. Nothing in particular don't even engage in politics that much. They're the least likely to attend a political meeting. They're the least likely to donate money to a candidate. They're the least likely to put up a political yard sign. They're the least likely to work on a campaign. They're the least likely to contact a public official. They're the least likely to attend a protest or march. They do not engage in the educational system. They do not engage in the political system. They do not engage in the religious system. They do not engage in most of American society. They are deinstitutionalized. They are floating in social and economic and educational space that nothing moors them down. Atheist agnostics are very politically engaged. They make a lot of money. They have good education. I don't worry about them from a sociological perspective. I'm really worried about them nothing in particular from a sociological perspective because they have nothing that ties them together. That's scary. And they're growing, right? 20, 25% of America. And by the way, nothing in particular still go to church, some of them, but 18% of nothing in particular still go to church at least once a year. So they're not like anti-religion. Atheists, it's less than 1%. Agnostics, it's 3%. And if you ask them, how important is religion in your life? Look at this here. 22% of nothing in particular say religion is somewhat important, and 13% say it's very important. So even amongst people who say they're not attached to religion, 35% of them say, yeah, but religion's somewhat or very important in my life. So they're not anti-religion. That's the key component with nothing in particular. Atheists, anti-religion. Agnostic, anti-religion. Nothing in particular's not necessarily anti-religion, this group is. And here's where the rubber meets the road for this. This is panel data. So they asked the same people the same questions in 2010 and 2014. And they asked people, what is your religion in 2010 and what is your religion in 2014? So amongst atheists, people who said they were atheists in 2010, 81% of them still said they were atheists in 2014. 2.4% said they were agnostic and 13% said they were nothing in particular, which means that less than 1 in 100 atheists became Christians over a 4-year period of time. And 2.6% went to another non-Christian faith. Amongst agnostics, 55% stayed agnostic, 23% became atheist, and 16% became nothing in particular, which means about 6 or 7% of them went back to a theistic tradition. 3.6% of them became Christians. Okay, so up here, 97% stayed nuns. Up here, 93% stayed nuns. But look at the top row, nothing in particular. Amongst nothing in particulars, 62% were still nothing in particular 4 years later. 8% became agnostic. 5% became atheists. But look at this. 16.4% of them said they were Christians in 2014. And 8.4% of them went to another faith tradition by 2014. So 3%, 7%, 25%. Okay? 25% of nothing particular went back to a religious tradition 4 years later. 25%. And that's 25% of 20% of the population. And for all you math majors out there, that's about 4% of America went from being a nun to being a sum in 4 years. 4% of America. If I was a pastor, which I might be, I'd probably want to focus my attention on the market share that actually would listen to me and actually would change their mind. Right? I actually wrote a piece for the Gospel Coalition saying we should stop debating atheists because, right? Like, why? They're not changing their minds. There's a whole group of people. By the way, this is 6% of America. This is 6% of America. This is 20% of America. What are we doing? You know? Focus your attention on places where people will listen to you. Up here, not down here. That's sort of a waste of time and energy and effort. This is what I think American religion looks like today. About 2/3 of Americans are religious. That's Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, Mormon, all that stuff. Okay. In the middle, we got about 1 in 5 Americans who are nothing in particular. And then we've got agnostics, and then we've got atheists. Okay. I think this is the most important segment of the American religious landscape right now. This is the transfer station where people go from here to there and from there to there. They almost never, if you look in the data, almost never do we see someone going from being an atheist to being a Protestant or a Protestant to an atheist. You know where they almost always end up before? Nothing in particular. It's sort of like the transfer station in American religion. So the battle's being fought going both ways. And unfortunately, a lot more people are going this way than going that way, right? They're going away from religion, not towards religion. But there's a lot to be said for this group right here, right? There's a lot to be said for that group, 1 in 5 Americans. So some takeaways, and we'll do questions. I think secularization is a lot like globalization. Remember when Donald Trump won the presidency and there was a Maytag plant in Indiana that was going to move all its jobs to Mexico? They're like, we're going to go in there and fix that. They gave a whole bunch of subsidies to the Maytag plant to keep those jobs in Mexico. They still moved all those jobs to Mexico, and they're using that incentive money to build robots, to build washers in the United States. Good luck stopping globalization. Good luck. And good luck stopping secularization too. I think it was inevitable in the United States that we're going to become more secular over time. I just think it's inevitable. The bigger question to me is, why did it take so long? And why has it gone so slow? Right? We should be a lot more secular than what we are. So when I lay my head on my pillow at night and think about why my church used to be 50 and now 12, I go, man, there's some macro level stuff going on that I can't change, right? I'm swimming against I'm swimming upstream. I've got a headwind, not a tailwind. The other thing is, if there's 60 million nuns in America, that means there's 60 million stories. This is a spreadsheet. This is what I look at all day, but I have to constantly remind myself that every line in that spreadsheet represents a human being that matters. Okay? I'm giving you data at the top level, which is great, but you also need to understand that every human being has a story when it comes to religion. And doing this kind of work that I do, I heard a lot of those stories, right? And sometimes they'll tell you stories like, oh, I quit going to church because I moved, or I got divorced, or my kids wanted to go to sports, or whatever it was. And sometimes you hear stories like, yeah, I was LGBTQ and the church told me I was going to hell, or my pastor abused me sexually, right? And sometimes you get all that mixed together, right? Sometimes you get really kind of like earthy, boring kind of reasons, and sometimes you get really high level theological, political reasons why people leave church. Everyone leaves church for a different reason. Understanding that reason and listening to their story is a good way to start thinking about how to think about the nuns. One thing for pastors, good golly molly, stop being so partisan. Like, I know like a lot of pastors like, I don't talk about politics in the pulpit, and I agree and the data agrees with you, but why do you go on that Facebook and just post partisan stuff all day long? Like, what's the value in that? To quote the great Michael Jordan, when he was asked why he was not more political, he said, because Republicans buy sneakers too. Right? Don't Democrats deserve a little Jesus as well? I mean, maybe you don't believe that, but you should probably leave, right? Because, by the way, in 1988, 45% of evangelicals were Democrats and 45% were Republicans, right? It's not like one party has a monopoly on the gospel right now. And they never have, never will. Stop being so partisan, especially on social media. The other thing is, and this is something that the pastors really have a hard time with, I have a hard time with, is they don't want to talk about politics in the pulpit, and I don't want to talk about politics in the pulpit. But you know what we should do? We should start thinking about making ways for our congregants to think about religion in a more holistic way. And there's something called Imago Dei, which argues that every human being is born in the image and likeness of God. What a radical concept, right? It's the idea that the unborn, God cares about, but you know what he also cares about? The illegal immigrant, right? He cares about the disabled, he cares about the single mother struggling in poverty. He cares about the person who can't get their heart checked because they can't afford the insurance, right? He cares about conservative issues and liberal issues because he cares about all of us. What a crazy idea, right? And that does not make you a partisan, that makes you a human being. And if pastors did a better job of teaching holistic theology that does not make one party look good and the other party look bad, but make everybody look bad, we'd be a step further along the road. I've heard so many pastors say, well, I can't talk about politics because they get 20 hours of Fox News a week and they get 1 hour of me. Don't give up, right? Don't give up. Don't cede the ground to them, whatever it be, MSNBC, CNN, or Fox. Don't give them that. You can fight back. I'll end with one story and then we'll do questions. The parable of the sower. My little church of, we have about 12 or 14 people on an average Sunday. We do a brown bag program where we pack 202 brown bags of food that have 13 items that go to our local public school system. My boys go to a public school system that's one of the poorest in the state of Illinois. 84% of kids in my kids' public schools are in free or reduced lunch. Okay, so almost all the kids in my kids' public school are in poverty. And if we don't give them food on the weekends, they will go hungry on the weekends. In America, in the year of our Lord, 2022. So what we do is we pack the bags up and we put them in these little boxes and we take them to the school. We put a little envelope in there, a little flyer that just says, we're First Baptist Church. I know you don't know us and we don't know you. We never see the kids, by the way. We don't want to see the kids. All we say in there is, we love you. And if you need any help, here's our number. That's it. We've hardly ever got a call from that. But one day we got a call on a Friday. It was this grandmother who had to take care of her grandson because her mom was out of the picture because of drugs. It was like October and winter was coming and it was getting cold. And she, my grandson needs a coat and we don't have any coats and I can't afford a coat. And we just so happened to be having a rummage sale in the fellowship hall that weekend. And we said, come on down, take anything you want. The kid walks out with 3 full sacks of clothes, smiling from ear to ear. I never got the kid's name. I never got the grandma's name, and I don't care. But what I do care about is when he's 25 years old and he's sitting at the bar and someone yells about how bad religion is, I hope he says that one church who didn't know about me cared about me. That's it, right? That's the ball game. If you sow the seed, it's not on you to determine where it lands. That's up to somebody else. But that does not relegate your ability to throw the seed. I showed you a bunch of stats that will bum you out, and they bum me out, but that does not change our responsibility, which is to continue to do the work, build the kingdom, make the world a better place, more equitable, more loving, more peaceful, more kind, more justice, right? That's what we need in this world. And if the nuns continue to rise, that's out of your control. That's somebody else's problem, right? But your job is to throw seed, build the kingdom, do the best you can with what you have where you are. All right, let's do Q&A.
Brian, do you want to field your own questions or I?
No, go ahead, walk around. That's good.
Use the mic, please. There's a lot of us in here if you want.
You mentioned it was really concerning that so many people are nothing in particulars.
Mhm.
Why is that?
Because they're unmoored from civil society. And we know that's a bad thing. There's this idea in social science called social capital, which are these invisible bonds that bind yourself to other people around you. It's the idea that, like, even though I don't have kids in the public school, I still want the public school to be nice, right? You know, I don't use the park, I want the park to be safe, right? That's social capital. It means if somebody's house burns down the road that I don't know, I donate money to them, right? That's the bonds that we need. And if we don't have those bonds, we're all just fighting against each other and not with each other, right? We have to have social capital. And religion used to be one of the greatest generators of social capital in American society. And I'll be the first to say, I wish something else would replace that. But guess what? Nothing has. Nothing has. And everyone's like, well, the atheists could do it. I would love for the atheists to start, giving billions of dollars to charity. But I don't see a lot of atheist organizations in Poland and Ukraine right now helping out those refugees. Right? I would love that. I have no problem with them. People go, anybody from any religion going over there helping people. You know who's over there right now? A lot of Christian missionaries over there helping people right now. Right? That's my issue with Nothing in Particular is they feel like they're only out for themselves. And I think that's a scary way to go through life. We need to care about other people. That's how we, not just from a Christian perspective, from a social science perspective, if you stop caring about your community, nothing good comes of that. Nothing good comes of that because then everyone else is your enemy. Right? They're not your community. They're someone else, and we other people, and that's bad. So that's why I think Nothing in Particulars are really, really scary because they just don't have ties to anything else. I want them to be involved. I want them to feel engaged. If they would replace the religious piece with another social piece that does good for social capital, I'm 100% in favor of that. But I just don't see any evidence in the data or otherwise that's actually happening. That's my problem. Yeah.
I appreciate this talk a lot. When I came in the door, I'd never heard of a nun before, and I came to find out what they were because I'm not Catholic either. Didn't know if that was a kind of a nun. My question is I preach in a non-denominational congregation.
Yeah.
I'm a Free Methodist Protestant. I have Catholics in my congregation.
Yeah.
And because I didn't, I'm going to ask this question. Is it possible that I don't really want to ask this question. I just want to make this observation. Then I want to ask my question.
Okay.
Is it possible that if I had gotten a survey and it asked me the kind of things you're asking, I would have probably marked that I'm a nun because I might misinterpret the question that it actually means I'm ambivalent about what kind of a church I go to as long as it's preaching the gospel. Yeah. So that's just the thought that I love the stuff you've presented, and that's one thing I just wonder about.
Yeah. So here's a myth from my new book, Non-Denominational Christians Are Rare. In 1972, 3% of all Protestants said they were non-denominational. Now it's 25% of all Protestants say they're non-denominational. And I just published a paper and I wrote it up for Christianity Today where there was a survey that asked, you had the choice of saying you're Protestant or Christian, and young people have no idea what the word Protestant means. So the answer to your question is, I lay in bed at night and think about the exact same thing that you mentioned. It terrifies me, but I don't know how to get around it, right? I don't know how to say like, oh, you're really a Protestant. You just don't know it. I think part of it is non-denominational churches have overcorrected by saying we're anti-institutional, we're anti, we don't use the word Protestant. Like non-denominational churches are Protestant evangelical churches, guys. Let's just call them what they are. Like I love how all these churches are like, we're not gonna be First Baptist Church and we're going to be the View. That'll bring the kids in, right? We change our name, that's what they want. You still need to teach some sort of basic, religious understanding of who you are and where you exist in, theological space. And I think that would be my call to a lot of non-denominational pastors is the sermons about 3 reasons to be a better father are great, but what about a sermon about the Protestant Reformation and what it means for you? Throw that in every once in a while, right? Let's give a little deep dive educationally for you to understand who you are and what you are. Otherwise, we don't get any catechism in the modern church, right? We don't teach you anything. We just try to make you feel better, which is not nothing. Don't get me wrong, but we need some roots here. And just from a very selfish survey standpoint, we need to teach young people what a Protestant is so you guys can answer the survey questions correctly. Otherwise, it's a nightmare for me. So if you go to a non-denominational church, just please, for the love of God, just mark Protestant down. I remember when me and Eric were in college, you take those surveys and they said what your race was. I always mark other and write child of God in the box. Don't do that. That's annoying, all right? I was such a smug young man. So just answer what you are. And if you're Protestant, just say you're Protestant for goodness sake,
Other questions?
Okay, so one of your graphs show that the majority of nothing in particulars are like in our generation, like college students. So for us being in a school that is predominantly Protestant, okay, so what would you leave us with to like, what is the best thing we can do to change that?
I think it's teaching young people the value of joining things. It seems like it's such a basic concept, but it's so radical anymore. It seems like it's good to be a part of something. It's good to be a part of something. Like, I feel like I'm like preaching like Billy Graham style right now. You need to be a part of a community of faith or something else. But right now in most communities, there's no other option. So a part of faith is good. And I don't care what kind from a sociological perspective. I don't care if you're Buddhist, Catholic, go to church, work on your community, clean up the park, feed hungry kids, love your neighbor. Like, these are things that we need to do more of, because I think the polarization we're seeing in America is, and actually in the new book I talk about this, if you ask, what I love the questions where they ask Republicans what percentage of Democrats are atheists, they say 33%. Does that seem right to you after the stats you just saw? No, it's closer to 10%, right? And you ask Democrats, what percentage of Republicans make over $100,000 a year? They say 50%. You know what percentage it actually is? Less than 5%. You know what we do? We create the worst version of the other side, then hate that version. If you join something, it's not an abstraction anymore. You're sitting next to a Republican in church, right? You're sitting next to a Democrat in the pew. So now they're not an abstraction to you. They're a real, honest to God human being that exists. And it's really hard to hate a human being that you know, right? We know there's tons of data on what's called social contact theory. For instance, if you don't know any Muslims, you're much more anti-Muslim. But if you have a guy that you work with that's a Muslim, it's hard to hate, Bob, who sits next door to me in the cubicle, because Bob's a good guy and loves his family. You need to join stuff so you can realize the world's bigger than your world, right? Joining things is good. Being part of community is good. And the one culture shock I had, which probably Ewok had too, once you left Greenville, you realize, wow, there's not a lot of community out there in the real world. You got to make it. It doesn't just come to you. You have to go to it. And you've got to be willing to lead. You got to be willing to give your time, your energies, your efforts, your monies to make it happen, right? I'm on this rec club board. We have a pool in my community. I wasn't even a member 2 years ago, and now I'm on the vice president of this board, and I hate every minute of it. But you know what? I love the community that pool creates every summer with my kids and their friends. You guys get my point here? It's awful. I hate doing that work. I'd rather sit at home and watch Netflix. But you know what? My sociologist training kicks in and goes, join something, dummy. Be part of something bigger than yourself. Help the community. And it has. It's been a tremendous benefit. And my kids talk about all the good times they had at the pool. And I go, okay, I guess I got to do another year. Right? Because I want them to understand the value of community. That's what the younger generation misses. That's what my generation misses. Used to be your parents and grandparents couldn't watch Netflix all day and stay at home. They had to go out and like talk to people to entertain themselves. Maybe we should try that again. Right? Maybe a good conversation might change a few things about how you think, about how you feel. And I'll be honest with you. Sometimes you can over socialize, but I think most of us are deeply under socialized as adults. We need more socialization, more interaction. Such a good thing for us. So join stuff, extol the virtues of community. It's really good. Go ahead.
Yeah. So sociology of religion says the more educated, the more wealthy you are, the less religion. Nuns seem to defy that.
Yeah.
According to your data. So why are they checking out? What's the source of that? If it's not financial stability or intellectual, reason, why the checkout? The church just irrelevant? Or is it technology? What would you put your finger on? It's probably not one thing, but many things.
So first things first, more educated people are less likely to say they never or seldom go to church. Let me say that. The more educated you are, the more likely you are to go to church. Okay? And the more likely you are to say you're affiliated with a religious tradition. That's something that like the average person does not understand about the data. This is attendance right here. Look, this is 13 waves of a survey, 500,000 respondents in every single wave. The more you go to church, the less likely you are to say you never or so. I'm sorry. The more education you have, the less likely you are to say you never or seldom attend church. In every data I've ever looked at, that's true. All right. Education does not lead people away from church attendance or religious affiliation. I mean, there's another graph here I can show you right here. Yeah. This is the share who are nuns by education level from every survey wave from 2008 to 2021. Look, every time. So the line goes downward every time. The more education, the less likely you are to say you have no religious affiliation. Now, you do have a less belief, by the way. More educated people are less likely to say they have a certain belief in God. So lower belief, but not lower behavior or belonging. Why are people leaving? I don't think they're leaving for like high level, like I'm mad at the church because of transubstantiation reasons. I think that's something that like, and this is something we talked about at lunch today, right? When you have a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. And if you're a theologian, every problem is a theological problem. I'm a sociologist. Every problem for me is a sociological problem, right? I think pastors get so obsessed with the vertical dimension of faith, they forget that church is a community of people who join together. People joining together, right? People. Horizontal dimension is just as important, if not more than vertical. And so I'm doing this project right now called the D-Church Initiative, where we're doing a survey of why people leave church. You know what the answers they kind of give are for most often? It just didn't work for me. Or I moved. Or I got divorced. Or I fell out of the habit. Or my kids got in activities I didn't have time for it. They're not giving like reasons like CRT and misogyny and, you know, like these political stuff we all want to think it is. It's not that. It's just like, I didn't really feel like close to a religion anyway. And then it just was easier to not get up on a Sunday morning and stay in my bed. Like it's, you know what it's always is? Like those funny memes on Facebook, which is like, oh, thank goodness they canceled plans. Now I can stay at home. You know what I'm talking about? Like you want an excuse to stay home. Your brain goes, oh, it's easier to stay home. Fight that urge. Go do the thing. How many times have you been invited to something and then the day before you're like, I don't want to go to that. And then you get all dressed up and you go to the thing and you have a great time. You go and go, man, I'm glad I went to that. Fight the urge to not go, right? Go, show up, be there, be present. I think for religion, what happens to a lot of people, they go, it's just easier to not go. And nothing in their mind goes, I should try it anyway. They just stay home. Not because they're mad at religion, not because of, you know, Catholic Church pedophilia scandals or MAGA Trump churches. It's not because of that. They just get out of the habit of going and they stop going and that's it. And they don't feel like religion does much for them, which is a whole different category, right? Like we can talk about that for a second. But for most people, it's very like practical reasons. It's not high level, you know, like theological problems they're having. It's not the gospel, it's just social stuff. It's just easier to not go.
Probably got time for one more final. This always puts pressure on people.
Better be
make
a
it
good one.
good. All right, here we go.
Yeah. So people talk about how ever since the pandemic, churches are plummeting in numbers. And so has there been a similar, like an opposite relationship with the nuns? Like, has there been drastic growth of the
Mhm.
nuns in the last 2 years?
This is the question I get asked all the time. And I just got asked in the class prior to this about the pandemic. It's a question I wish I could here's what happened and here's what it means. I don't have that answer for you. And I'm going to write an updated version of the Nuns, which is going to come out next March. And it's going to include a chapter on COVID and what COVID did to the American church. So here's what I know. There's a survey that I have access to. They did 6,000 respondents every week from the middle of July 2019 through the first week of January of 2021. So right smack through the heart of the pandemic. And the share of Americans who said they were nuns at the end of that survey was actually smaller than the share who said they were nuns at the beginning of that survey. Okay. So there's some tacit evidence that the nuns have not risen during COVID. However, church attendance did decline between 2019 and 2021, 22. How much of that is attributable to COVID versus how much is that attributable to just old people who went to church a lot dying, being replaced by people who don't go to church a lot? We don't know, and we might never know. What I said to the class before, and what I'll say to all you guys is, the recovery from COVID is incredibly lumpy and inconsistent, okay? Because some churches never closed, right? They were open the whole time, and then some churches just opened up in the last week or two, right? Some churches closed for a while and opened for a while, and closed for a while and opened for a while. Some churches have a lot of old people, and what old people didn't do? Go out during COVID. Some young non-denominational mega churches are full of young families who didn't give a rip about COVID and came back as soon as they could. You guys see my point here? Every church is having a different experience with COVID, and to lump it all together and say, well, this is what happened, I think is a broad oversimplification. I think we're not going to get the full answer to this question maybe ever, but definitely not for another year or so until all that COVID stigma kind of gets out of our system and we get back to meeting like this. So the answer is, I don't think it had a tremendous deleterious impact on church. I think it just continued the trend that was already existing, maybe accelerated it a little bit, but not anything outside the norm of just people leaving religion today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burge. Thank you
Guys.
so much. We really appreciate it. All right. All right. Honestly, we just want to thank you. It's important stuff for the kingdom, the church, and certainly the world as well too. So we want to thank the Beckett family for making this possible as well too, and advancement for working with us on this. But all right, thanks a lot. If you have questions, I'm sure you stick around for just a couple minutes and talk to you. Thanks.
Yeah.